Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Hello, X. Would you care to hear my story? It's quite long, so get yourself a drink and settle in. By the way, everything you are about to read is 100% true. Let's start with some background. You may refer to me simply as John. At the time of writing, I am 24 years old and married with a 19-month-old stepson. I grew up in the southeastern US, however, my mother is originally from the north. She became pregnant with me at a very young age and moved here to raise me with the help of my grandfather. Before long, she married the man whom I still consider my true father, and he was very good to us. In fact, I was not aware of the circumstances of my birth until I was 15. I will continue to refer to him simply as my father. Soon after, she became pregnant with the older of my two sisters. My father, for reasons I neither know nor care to know, committed self-end when I was about 4 years old. At the time, I did not understand death and thought he would return. Throughout my life, I have had quite a few run-ins with the paranormal, several of which I will refer to later in this story. I have seen what I believe to be apparitions, poltergeist activity, and experienced sleep paralysis on many occasions. However, I don't really believe it's much of a paranormal thing. It can be frightening, and on one occasion, I believe I even saw my deceased father. This story, however, will chronicle what I believe to be the most disturbing chain of events I have ever experienced relating to the paranormal, and the even more terrifying implications of them. I suppose the best place to begin would be when I moved in with my new roommates, who I will call Ashley and Tom. I had lived on my own before, but I had recently been laid off at my old job and was forced to move back in with my mom and current stepfather. The house my mother lived in at the time was the absolute most consistently haunted place I have ever lived, to the point where things stopped being scary and just got annoying. The most common things were hearing footsteps up and down the stairs above my room all night, every night. We thought it was rats or our dogs, at first, but considering the wait and interval between the footsteps, as well as the fact that they would stop as soon as you went to check, I find that very, very hard to believe. The second most common thing was poltergeist activity. Apparently, our ghost disliked fans. So much, in fact, that any fan not attached to the ceiling would switch itself off. In one instance, an oscillating fan violently slid itself across the kitchen floor, unplugged, and tipped itself over after one of us had turned it back on during dinner. My entire family, including my 4 step-brothers, my sisters, my mother, stepfather, and my cousin all witnessed this happen without explanation. Needless to say, moving away from that awful place and into a poltergeist-free space was just what the doctor ordered. I had been unemployed for around 4 months when, at long last, I had finally landed a new job at a local manufacturing plant. I had been saving money, looking for somewhere to go other than my parents' place, when one of my coworkers, Ashley, who had actually worked with me at my previous job with whom I had also shared a short-lived relationship with, offered me a room living with herself and Tom, who had been in a similar situation to me and had moved in the month prior. I agreed and quickly moved into my new smaller, yet quieter, abode. Ashley was an ex-Marine girl. Not terrible to look at and physically fit, though headstrong, as is characteristic of most jarheads. She owned 2 full-grown boxer hounds that were essentially her children. If the house were burning down, she may have had a difficult time choosing between saving them or her own mother. Tom was very shy and quiet, not a bad-looking guy, but very awkward, especially with women. He had retained his high school goth kid sense of style, and you could tell with one look into his room, which was adorned with all manner of Tim Burton and Invader Zim memorabilia among other generally dark, yet seemingly immature for his age, decor. We all got along quite well and even got Tom to come out of his shell on occasion, sometimes even taking him to bars with us and trying unsuccessfully to get him laid. It didn't take long for Ashley and I to become friends with benefits, as neither of us was looking for a relationship, especially with each other, but still had basic human needs that we could conveniently fill for one another. I learned soon after, however, that Tom had actually asked her out, to which she had denied him, effectively putting him in the friend zone. If I had known this, I would have been more discreet, but it was too late. He wasn't stupid, though I did detect occasional jealousy. It was for the best. She obviously wasn't his type at all, and she was older than him by several years. Several months passed this way, without incident, until Tom began to get behind on his rent. He had been spending all of his money on pot, and laying out of work to stay home and get high. It soon became apparent that he was showing many signs of depression, and given that he had a history of attempted self-end, Ashley decided to give him an ultimatum. She gave him 1 month to catch up on rent or go somewhere else, knowing he would go back home with his mother, which was probably a good thing. He began staying the night at his mom's more and more, rarely showing his face at our house until, finally, we stopped seeing him altogether. He had taken some essentials but had otherwise left his possessions untouched, so we just left them until he decided to come get them. After all this happened, things changed. This became apparent when soon after I had my first experience since the old place. I was driving home from work in my little Toyota pickup truck, around 7 or 8 at night, I'd say, just cruising and enjoying a cigarette. When I pulled into my driveway, I parked and set my brake like always, cut the truck off, and began gathering the stuff I was going to take inside with me. As I did, my truck shifted as if someone were getting out of the bed. Instinctively, I looked up into my rearview mirror only to see, of course, nothing there. At precisely the time I decided it was nothing to worry myself about, my truck quickly jumped forward, as if another car had tapped it from behind. Needless to say, this startled me quite a bit, so I opened the door and eased out, cursing as I dropped my father's Zippo onto the concrete in the process. As I knelt down to pick up the marred lighter, the truck again abruptly shifted forward, almost as if harboring aggression towards my presence. Stunned, I remained grounded but for a moment, as I quickly regained enough composure to pick myself up off the asphalt and sprint inside. As I hurriedly shut and bolted the door behind me, Ashley appeared from her room and inquired as to why my face was so pale.
What, you just get bum rushed by a ghost or something?
No, my stomach just feels like shit from eating Taco Bell again, I lied. Surely, I was just being weak, right? I reasoned with myself. Shit, I'm glad nobody saw me like that, I thought. I've seen way more shit than this before, but I couldn't shake the feeling. It was like something was watching me constantly. Ducking into cover just in time to escape being caught in my gaze as I scanned the woods outside through the living room window. Eventually, I gathered the courage to venture outside again and gather my left belongings, most importantly, Dad's Zippo. I picked it up and inspected it for new damage. Fortunately, it looked as it always had. It was a plain black Zippo, and it had a deep dent in the top with paint flaked off at the edges. I had been told by my mother that this very lighter was in my father's pocket when he shot himself, and that the dent had been caused by shrapnel from the bullet breaking up and hitting it. True or not, something had definitely hit it with quite impressive force to dent the lighter in such a way. The damage had not affected the lighter's function, however, and my mother had given it to me as a memento the previous year. First post-pick related, it's Dad's Zippo. Quickly, I inspected the lighter, grabbed my other belongings, and rushed back inside without further incident. After I returned, Ashley decided to go to bed and suggested I do the same. Needless to say, I did not sleep that night, and my spidey sense was at constant attention. It was a very, very long night. The next day, I got out of bed as soon as it was bright enough to see my bedroom floor, still feeling watched and somewhat paranoid, and drove to the local Starbucks. I ordered my usual iced triple grand 4-pump vanilla extra drizzle caramel macchiato. I used to work at a Starbucks, seriously, it's a good drink, and pretty much chugged it down. After I finished, I lit up a cigarette outside and watched the early bird hipsters for a bit before I decided to head back home. When I got there, Ashley met me at the door looking very tired. She informed me that her dogs had been up all night growling and staring at different spots in the room, and that when she did fall asleep, she was woken up by a nightmare, but she couldn't remember the details. Neither of us had slept, and we were both off, so we decided to remedy the situation with some natural medication. So we went around back and blazed a bit of her leftover stash. It was some good stuff, too. It didn't take long before we were both out like the dead. Over the course of the next few days, I kept having trouble sleeping due to the constant being watched feeling, and seeing things out of the corner of my eye every 5 minutes didn't help. I had always had insomnia, though, so it wasn't really anything new. I had functioned in worse shape before. Still, it wasn't pleasant. I had never carried this level of paranoia for so long after an event, and it was beginning to wear on me. The following weekend, I had smoked out earlier in the day, partially to shake the paranoid feeling, and had been vegging out in the recliner watching nearly a whole season of Spartacus when Ashley's room door cracks open, and her dogs bolt out of the room like a bat out of hell. Ashley followed, slowly stepping out of her room, looking tired and a bit pale. She flopped down on the couch at my feet, and in as firm a tone as I'd ever heard from her, she said, "We need to blaze, right now." Not wanting to turn down free weed, I obliged, and packed her favorite bowl to the brim with the last of her stash. After we finished off the bowl, she explained to me what had happened. She had been having a lucid nightmare about her and her family being chased by these evil-looking, black dogs. They had gotten every one of her family but her, and right when they caught her by her throat, she woke up, feeling like she had been choked, and both her dogs were staring at her, cowering in the corner, whining. The dream had really distressed her, which was saying something. We decided to do some good old-fashioned Google research, and what we came up with was rather disturbing. Everything pointed to these dogs from her dream being hellhounds, and according to the sources we found, most of them stated that their presence was warning of a demon desperately attempting to harm us. This all sounded like a very B-horror movie to us, but we kept reading on the stuff we had come across. One thing that stuck out to me in particular was an entry stating that remembering a past life could be a sign of demonic attachment or deception. I had remembered my mother telling me stories about when I was very young and telling her about things that couldn't possibly have happened at my age. So I called her and asked her about it. She told me that I used to talk about my grandfather's cabbie hat. He always called it a polished cab driver hat and told her that I wore the same kind of hat when I worked barefoot in the fields. She also reminded me about a time when I had seen my father after he had passed away. This one I remembered vividly. I had been playing outside in the woods. They weren't scary woods, by any means. It was a rural farmland area, and the woods near our house weren't very dense. And I had come across a tall man in what looked like black spring jacket and blue jeans. When I got closer, he looked at me and smiled. It was Daddy. Finally, after all this time, he'd come back, just like I thought. I remember we walked around the woods and talked about nothing in particular for a long time. Eventually, we ended up back at the edge of the woods, near our backyard. I told Daddy to come see Mama with me, but he just shook his head and said I can't. Being a child, my solution was simple. I'll just bring Mom to you. I ran up to the house and swung the door open, screaming for Mom, smiling and telling her the great news. Daddy was home. And he was right outside. I remember how much my mom held me and cried. I remember being so confused why she was upset. After all, I knew she wanted Dad to come home more than even me. I went back outside after Mom finally let me go to tell him what had happened. I never saw him again. After Mom tearfully retold the story, I told her I loved her and ended the conversation. Armed with renewed memories, I decided to research further and pursue more information about seeing my past father. Yet again, I found entries claiming demonic deception, trying to gain your trust. This hurt my heart. I had just known Dad was the one I saw that day, but could I really have been fooled? Even more pressing, had I been followed since I was a child? Growing up, I had always been terrified of the dark, but not sure why. I remembered once, just before Dad died, laying in bed in the dark and seeing these god-awful, horrifying, red eyes coming closer and closer to me. I remembered screaming for help, and my mom telling me that Donnie would protect me, but I kept freaking out. She says that I was just really sick, to the point that I was hallucinating, but I remembered that. It was real to me. It still makes me shudder. All the experiences, the feeling I was being watched. I felt like it was all making too much sense. But why now? Why all of a sudden like this was I being targeted? Ashley had a good idea.
Tom was really into that kind of thing. Maybe he got happy with a Ouija board or something one day and let some kind of bad spirit out.
So we decided to look through the belongings he had left. We looked through a bunch of stuff in his closet and found a whole lot of strange things, including some odd candles and incense, a couple pentagrams, the Ouija board we thought about, and even a dress. We eventually came across a big, gray CD binder that had a couple of porno mags in it and some CDs labeled 1/8 in Sharpie. Deciding to be nosy, we assumed it had to be porn, and given the weird stuff we had already come across, we wanted to see just how kinky all Tommy Boy really was. It was wrong, I admit, but what we found was informative. We chose a CD at random and popped it into the disk drive of my laptop. It was an audio file, but a very long one and without any track markers. Curiosity piqued, I clicked the play button and through my speakers blared the words "Satan's kingdom was stolen from him." What the hell? We both said at the same time. The whole thing was a collection of satanic sermons. Putting two and two together, I decided not to spend the night at home. That night, I went to a good friend's house. We'll call him Jim. His father had been a missionary for years, so he knew his dogma pretty well, which was just what I needed. We started talking over a beer about everything that had been going on, trading ideas and theories, and generally shooting the shit. After a while, I began to feel that same paranoia that I had been feeling, but I initially brushed it off as that sort of feeling you get sometimes when you talk about ghosts and demons, etc. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. As I was sitting there, listening to him, I sort of zoned out and daydreamed this strange beast walking behind the couch Jim was sitting on. It looked shrouded in mist, and the only way I can describe anything close to it is like a storm Atronach from Morrowind. After that, I snapped out of it and went to go piss. The feeling had gotten far, far worse now. So much so that I rushed my piss as fast as I could because I felt vulnerable. At this point, felt like it was time to let Jim know what was up, so I began saying, "Hey, man, look, I don't mean to freak you out, but..." That's when he cut me off and said, "I'm way ahead of you, dude." So we just listened for a bit. I'm not sure what we were listening for, but it was instinct. We didn't hear anything, but the atmosphere in the room just got heavy. It was as if something terrible was imminent, and we knew it. This was when we noticed that it had gotten cold enough in his house to see your own breath. At this point, all I wanted was a cigarette, so I grabbed my lighter and was about to be headed towards the sliding glass door that led to the deck when I noticed Jim's expression. He was so pale, and his mouth was just slightly agape as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. He was staring towards the door, so I stepped that way, and out of nowhere I was gripped by this sudden, deep, utterly hopeless, absolute terror to the point that it sent such a chill down my spine, I literally burst into tears. I was paralyzed, only for a second, but that felt like an eternity. I quickly moved away from that cursed spot, and Jim, thinking on his feet, grabbed his Bible and began reading a passage. I quickly followed suit, reading along with him. I'm not sure what we read or why we read it, but somehow it worked. After several minutes of this, the feeling of terror was gone, the air wasn't thick, we both felt fine, great, in fact. We even watched The Exorcist after, just for fun. After the movie, Jim went to bed, and I crashed on the couch. I woke up around 9 or 10 a.m. in a sleep paralysis state. It's a pretty common thing for me, so it doesn't really faze me anymore, and I was fully aware of what was going on, so I decided to just wait it out. As I'm laying there waiting for the paralysis to wear off, something speaks to me. Not with words, or an audible voice, sort of like telepathy, I guess. I can only describe it like a train of thought going through your head that you know is definitely not your own. You can't even articulate it into a language, but you know exactly what it means, through feeling alone. And whatever it was said to me this way: if I can't get to you, I'll get to those close to you. And just like that, I was free of paralysis. No fear, no paranoia, just an understanding of what I was just told. Over the next month, Ashley and I simply could not get along. She was constantly grumpy and mean. She kept trying to milk me for money, claiming I owed her rent that I didn't, that kind of thing. Before long, we were no longer friends. So I found my own place, got my shit one day when she was at work, and without notice, moved out. As I was leaving, I felt that presence again. I ignored it the best I could, but I got the feeling it was happy. In a strange, evil sort of way. A few months pass and I hear nothing from Ashley. 1 year later, I find out she's been hospitalized, not sure why, and that she lost her job and her house. Imagine how I felt. I couldn't dare to face her with a clear conscience. I have a wife and a stepson now. I still see things out of the corner of my eye sometimes, and I hear strange sounds on the baby monitor every now and again, but not that terrible presence. One thing, though. My son has recently become very afraid of the dark. A lot has happened since I wrote last. I now have a beautiful 4-month-old daughter, and my son is 3 years old, plus change. I guess I'll jump right into what's happened since my daughter's birth. On the day my daughter was born, my whole family, both sides, was overjoyed. She had been the first girl born in my family since my little sister, and the first in my wife's family since herself. That makes her the first in 21 years for my family, and 23 for my wife. We both had large families, but all our cousins, on mother's and father's sides, had been male for this long. She was beautiful, with a head full of brown hair and dark blue eyes, a Superman baby, just like her father. My grandfather, who passed away the previous year, would have been overjoyed, and he later made his presence known. My grandfather was deeply religious, a Catholic, but he had a deep respect for Jewish tradition and custom. He often traveled for his job, and most often, he traveled to Israel. He would always bring souvenirs back, such as coins or odd foods he could get through customs, and give them to my sisters and I as gifts. The night she was born, we spent the night at the hospital. When I woke up in the morning and changed my daughter's diaper, I found a single Israeli coin under my daughter's hospital mattress. We were the only ones who had been in or out of the room, save for our caretaker nurse. We asked our nurse and some of the other staff if they had put it there, and we were assured that any staff putting foreign objects such as that in a newborn's bedspread would be grounds for termination. I knew it had to be him. Aside from that, our first week home, my son went on and on about seeing and talking to Grandpa. He'd never had a chance to meet my grandfather, and he referred to his other grandparents as Papa or Peepaw. We opened an old photo album and started asking him who the people in the pictures were. He pointed to me, and he'd say, "That's Daddy." He pointed to my wife, and he'd say, "That's Mommy." To my father-in-law, "That's Peepaw," and so forth. When we got to a picture of my grandfather, without hesitation, he stated, "That's Grandpa." We asked him if that was who he talked about all the time, and he said Grandpa likes to watch Ella sleep. Ella is my daughter. Hearing that my grandfather was watching over my family was simultaneously comforting and unnerving. It's not every day you hear your son tell you that your dead relatives are standing watch. I'm not so sure what to think now, however, as things began happening soon after my daughter's arrival that caught my attention in a negative way. Late one night, while recording a gaming session with a friend for YouTube, we were out taking a smoke break when my wife called me, irritated, from the bedroom and asked what we were doing, making so much noise, stomping around. We told her we had just been quietly smoking outside and thought nothing of it. She was obviously annoyed and hung up. We went back inside and downstairs to finish recording. Several minutes later, we hear fairly loud stomping upstairs, loud enough to pick up on my condenser mic. I actually made a comment in the recording about how my wife was stomping around, pissed off, and we continued. Minutes later, my wife comes running downstairs and tells us what she heard and what she saw. Or rather, didn't see. She had my daughter in her arms and was liquid paper white. She claims she had been laying in bed, bedroom door half open, and heard what she thought was me walking up the stairs. She said she was relieved I was finally done and was coming to bed and was watching the door, anticipating me entering the room. She kept watching the door as she listened to the footsteps walk past our bedroom and into my daughter's room. She heard the steps, but nobody was there to make them. It was then that she ran into my daughter's room, picked her up out of bed, and ran downstairs. Needless to say, she didn't sleep that night. We caught both the footsteps and her story in the recording. After the footsteps incident, a few other strange, though familiar, for me, at least, things began happening. I've been experiencing sleep paralysis much more often, which I normally don't attribute to anything paranormal, but still not something I enjoy. During these episodes, I seem to be experiencing an even more foreboding presence than normal. There's always something there during these episodes, and it's never pleasant, but I've researched sleep paralysis enough to understand it's simply my brain working against me. However, this new presence just feels different, and I occasionally feel it, even when I'm not in a paralyzed state. On top of that, I've been seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye, moving about my room a lot more at night while trying to fall asleep. I don't like shadows, never have. They've never been associated with anything good, at least for me. I believe my son is developing some sort of foresight, as well. On 2 separate occasions, he's mentioned a boy upstairs near his room and bathroom. On one occasion, he was absolutely convinced there was a boy in his bathroom, and he couldn't go potty. I asked him to show me where he was, and he pointed at the bathtub. Obviously, there was nothing there, but my son seemed legitimately frustrated that I could not perceive what he was clearly able to see. My wife has never experienced anything too paranormal, and she doesn't like any of it one bit, so I tend to keep most of what I see to myself, out of fear that she'll either take it the wrong way or just plain get spooked. She's recently seen a few things I find noteworthy, however. For instance, we were sitting at the dinner table one night, and she was facing the glass door that leads outside, while I was facing the wall perpendicular. She simply looked at me with a blank stare, and as calmly as she's ever talked, she said, "I just saw a man walk up the stairs." I nearly choked at the sheer eccentricity of the statement. It was just so out of the blue, I didn't know whether she was joking or serious. She explained that she saw a tall man walk up the stairs behind her, in the reflection of the glass door. Obviously, I checked upstairs, just to humor the thought, and found nothing. I can't explain how out of character this was, for her. She's normally spooked by loud noises, needless to say, tall phantom men. But she didn't so much as shiver at the sight. The only other noteworthy thing I can think of that's happened recently was the other night. I was laying in bed, and I felt a negative presence. I'm sure most people feel things like this occasionally, so I don't consider it out of the ordinary, but I have a habit of telling whatever presence leave, "You're not welcome in my home," under my breath. I've done it for years, I believe, because I read somewhere on an obscure website that you can tell bad spirits to leave, and they will. I'm sure it's just a placebo effect, but I do often feel better after I tell whatever I feel to leave. This time, though, after telling the presence to leave, my jaw immediately locked up, rendering me unable to speak or move my mouth at all. I panicked and quickly jumped out of bed, startling my wife, and my jaw released with an audible pop. I do have TMJ, which I inherited from my mom, but I've never experienced lockjaw because of it.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.